Hello everyone, I'm here today to do my December wrap-up, the last month of the year. And I've read quite a few books in December, but a lot of them are audiobooks, and for me audiobooks are a completely different category of books that I read because I read them in a completely different setup. And yeah, anyway, so I thought I will start with the audiobooks and then move to the other books, physical books that I read. So the first audiobook I read was A Frozen Woman by Annie Ernaux. This was my first Annie Ernaux, and I'm not gonna lie, this was a bit Bob from the Booker fault, because I don't know, something about Annie Ernaux, I just didn't feel drawn to her. But then he talked about this book and it sounded so amazing, I decided to go ahead and read it or listen to it. And this is about sort of motherhood. It's also about how we get trapped into gender roles even though we thought we were not going to. How we fight against that, but again we get trapped into it because that's how we grew up, that's how society expects us to be, and that's especially true in this case for Annie Ernaux when she changes social class. Like, she grew up in working class and she grew up seeing her mom and the other women around her be strong and work and all of that because they had to, and when she moves into the middle class, completely different things are expected of her. She's expected to stay at home and cook and like clean and be a housewife, because they can afford her not working and her being a housewife. But she doesn't want that, but she's still forced into that by society and by her own prejudices in some cases. So this book explores that dichotomy, and I found this very insightful and very relatable as well in some places. I find myself nodding on things that she was saying, and like she was very clear on the things that she was saying, and I found that really interesting. However, I did not click with Annie Ernaux's personality, so I didn't relate to her on a personal level. I just related to the general struggle of being a woman in this world, and obviously this book is oldish, so it's a few years from now that these things happen, but still it is relatable nowadays. But I related to that part, but not to Annie Ernaux as a person, so that made me feel like I enjoyed this book, but I don't need to read any more Annie Ernaux. That's not a priority for me. So yeah, take that as you will. The next book that I listened to was The Door by Magda, and it's not exactly a thriller, but it has that tension building. So this is about again, middle class couple in Hungary, and they hire this woman to be their housekeeper, and this housekeeper, she's a very different person from everybody else, let's say. She's always very proper, she's always really like demanding of people and also of herself, but she's always kind and trying to help people, so people like her even though she doesn't come forward as the most friendly person always. But she has sort of like a secret, like she never lets anybody ever go into her house. That door of her house is completely closed, and so we have this tension building on what is behind that door that she doesn't want anybody to see. And at some point she gets sick, and there is this dilemma if they want to open that door or not, and what's behind that door and what she would want them to do and stuff like that. And that's how the tension is built. And this was very masterfully done, I think. Like the way that she builds attention, even though there is no murder, there is no case to be solved. I thought it was really brilliant. And it was very captivating. I just wanted to keep listening or keep reading to know what was going on. And so yeah, it was really powerful, and I really enjoyed it, and I think the hype for this book is deserved. Then the next book I read, an audiobook, it was The Good Life Elsewhere by Vladimir Lorchenkov. And this is a Moldovan book, and it follows kind of a community of people that really want to leave Moldova, because apparently Moldova is not a very good country to be in. Like the politics are really bad, and everyone is struggling to stay alive, have enough to eat, and all of those things. There is this person in this village that is obsessed with Italy, and so he convinces everyone that they should all try to move to Italy because it's like paradise. And it's very funny. The audiobook was, it was good, but sometimes it was a bit jarring because the narrator was, when there was dialogue, he was making the dialogue with a Moldovan accent, I will assume, and I'm not sure if that was offensive or not. It was kind of weird, but other than that, I think this was funny, and it was making lightheartedness of a situation that was not so light, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it was good, and I enjoyed it. The next book I read in audiobook was This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, and this has been doing the rounds in BookTube a while ago. It's the diaries of a junior doctor in the NHS, and he kind of highlights all of the things that are wrong with the system and how we treat doctors. Like they should do 40-hour shifts, and nobody bats an eye about that. And this was funny, and this was very witty, and I understand why most people like it, but to be honest, I didn't think it was that special. And maybe this is because this has sparked a lot of commentary around the medical system in different places, in that kind of same format. And I like to see those sketches in YouTube sometimes, like the shorts. There's quite a few people that make shorts about how messed up the health system in different places are. And this fitted within that category, and I liked that kind of thing, so I enjoyed it, and I thought it was very funny and very witty, but I didn't think it was that special. The only thing I will say is that at the last chapter he explains why he stopped being a doctor, and he was an obstetrician, so he was mostly treating women and their uteruses, right, and their pregnancies and things like that. And because of something that went wrong, because he was at the end of a shift, one of the mothers that he's caring for dies, and that sparks all these emotions in him, and he decides to quit being a doctor. That's the main thing that he says at the end. And I found that really touching. I think that when he stopped trying to be funny and witty and snarky, I think that there were some very touching moments, and I found those the most impactful and the most important. But other than that, yeah, it's enjoyable, but I don't think it's like going to stay with me forever or anything. Then the next audiobook I read was Bibliolepsy by Gina Apostol, and this is a Filipino book, and this was very well written. It's like an ode to literature. She just talks about books with such care and such love, and it's about two sisters. One of them is obsessed with books, so I'm assuming that's the author's story, and the other one is kind of this very esoteric person. She believes in the energies and the flow of energies and all of that kind of stuff, and they are living in the 80s in Philippines, so there is dictatorship and there is fights going on to stop that, and we see how each of them reacts and how the society in this specific time and this specific place was. And I found it quite insightful and very nice to read. It was very well written. Again, I'm not sure if it's going to stay with me forever, but I think that it was very well done. Then the next audiobook I read was The Ardent Swarm by Yamen Manai. And again, this one was another one that the narrator did weird accents for, which again, I don't know how I felt about that. But this was kind of, and it was told in a very naive way, and it's the story of a few villagers in Tunisia when the democracy stops and there is this Muslim organization that takes over, and it's kind of a little bit like ISIS. I'm not sure if it was called ISIS or not, but yeah, they have like a more fundamentalist and radical views of things, and we follow mainly two people. One of they're friends, they're very good friends, and one of them is a beekeeper and has a wife, and he just wants to lie low and take care of his bees. That's all he wants to do. And the other friend, he is heartbroken. He's like the woman that he loved decided to leave for the city because he needed to make money, and he's heartbroken. And then he goes to the mosque to pray, and there is this imam that tells him that he should join the forces of God. So he goes to fight for the Muslim fundamentalists, and so the two friends kind of lost touch with each other and like have very different, like they broke their friendship because they have very different views on this. They're both Muslims, but it's not the same, right? And at the same time, there is this plague of giant hornets, I think, that is killing all the bees. So there is a professor that goes to Japan to get some queens from Japan that will help fight the hornets, and he gives it to this guy that takes her, this beekeeper. So that's kind of like the setup of the story, and yeah, we follow the different people's feelings about what's happening in Tunisia, but also about the bees and how they react and how valuable they are, and like there's a lot of care for the bees, and you can feel it in the text. And I thought it was nice. I thought it was told in a very naive way, which worked in this case, but I can see how it might not work for everybody, but it worked for me, and I think it was very heartwarming in a weird way, because the topics are obviously not heartwarming, but the care that the people gave and the love that the people gave on those circumstances, I found very heartwarming. So yeah, I enjoyed that one as well. And then the last audiobook I read was In the Company of Men by Véronique Tadjo, and this is a Ivory Coast book, and it basically follows the Ebola epidemic, and it's told from different perspectives. So sometimes we follow a person that got Ebola or a nurse, sometimes we follow a doctor, sometimes we follow different people, but the audiobook is always done in the same voice, so it was really difficult to know who was speaking, and I found that in the audiobook at least it was really distracting me. I don't know if you read the physical copy if that will happen or not, but that was bothering me. But other than that, I found that the account was quite strong, and the way that they talked about, for example, how the locals were treated compared to how people around the world were treated, like missionaries and stuff, but also at the same time they talked about volunteers from all over the world that went to Ivory Coast and other countries around them to help stop Ebola and work with the patients there. It talked about the devastation in the families, like the fact that your loved one is dying and you are not supposed to help them, you're not supposed to hug them, you're not supposed to be in the same room with them, you just go to the hospital, leave them there and leave, and how heartbreaking that was, because obviously if your loved one is sick, like if your child is sick, you want to be with them, you need to be with them, and you know they're probably going to die. You want to be with them in those moments before they die, and not being able to do that was really heartbreaking. And the way that it talks about how sometimes we are not conscious of what the things that we do and how they are going to affect these diseases was very poignant as well. I think this was written before the COVID pandemic. So it was about Ebola that didn't luckily become a pandemic, because that's a lot more deadly than COVID. But a lot of the things that were saying about how we treat this kind of diseases was very remnant of COVID and how we treated COVID. So yeah, I also enjoyed that. So those are all of the audiobooks that I read this month. When it comes to physical books, the first one I finished was Palau, A Cultural Geography by Robert Evans, and as the title might suggest, this was a book about the country of Palau, which is an archipelago on the east of Philippines. I thought that for some reason that Palau was in the middle of the Pacific, but it's a lot closer to like Indonesia and Philippines than I thought. But anyway, now I know that. But this was really detailed and really academic, and I honestly didn't care that much. There were sections that I just skipped because there was like maybe 100-200 pages of it was the author listing all of the villages that were in Palau, the ones that are inhabited and the ones that are not inhabited, and just listing facts about each single village. And at some point I just didn't care. I found the cultural section, so when they explain, I don't know, how like the religious beliefs or the role of women in society, which by the way was very disturbing. Apparently the families send their daughters to the bigger towns to be prostituted for a couple of years. And then they are happy when they come with all the money, and that's a normal thing they do. I found that very disturbing. But there are facts like that I found more engaging, but there are also so many facts about so many small details that only an academic will care about. So I found it overall very tedious to go through, to be honest. But this was for my Reading Around the World project, and there are not that many books about Palau, so this was counted for that. The next one is The Fig Tree by Goran Vojnović, and this was for Slovenia, for the Read Around the World project. And I really enjoyed this one. This one was a sort of a family saga. There were 3 generations of people, and in the Yugoslavia area, and the younger generation, so the son of all of them, he is Slovenian. He was born in Slovenia, and it's kind of around after the Yugoslavian war, and it kind of explores how the Yugoslavian war affected each of these generations and their sense of identity, because I have found that reading around this area, there is a lot of emphasis of if you're Serbian, Slovenian, or Croatian, or whatever, or if you're just Yugoslavian, or like it's very complicated to situate yourself when you were part of a country, and that country is divided in pieces, and maybe you are from a certain place but you live in a different place, and it is a very difficult thing to navigate, and also there is the religious aspect, because there is, in this area of Yugoslavia, there is quite a lot of Muslims, because it used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and there is also the Christians and the Orthodox Christians, all that. So that also adds to your identity and the things that people can fight about again. So it's a very complex. It's a very complex place to live in, and a very complex place to be from. And this book explores a lot of those things very, very, very well, I think, with a lot of nuance and a lot of thought. And the stories of the people themselves are also interesting. So yeah, I found this book really nice, and maybe it's because I like family sagas, but yeah, this was a good book for me. Then I also read White Hunger by Aki Ollikainen, and this is a Finnish book, and it's set in, I think it was the beginning of the 20th century. There was a famine in Finland, and a lot of people died. And it's a very short book, it's like 100 pages, and it follows different people from a village, how they react to the hunger, and the balance between being selfish and wanting to have your food for yourself, or if someone knocks on your door dying of hunger, will you share it even though you barely have enough for yourself? That kind of debate, let's say. And I think it was like the characters were not that important in this book. It was more about the atmosphere and the pressing needs that was trying to be the main point of this book, and I think that the author did that well. I didn't care about the characters, but I don't think I was supposed to care about the characters. It was more just about the impact of that feeling of being hungry and wanting to be selfish, but also wanting to help others and all of that. Then I also read The Cyclist Conspiracy by Svetislav Basara, and this was, I don't know what I was expecting, but this was not what I was expecting. This was a very wild ride. It was about this organization in Serbia, Imaginary, that was started in the 1800s, and it's kind of the Illuminati. It's kind of secret but not secret, and they kind of have this fetish with cycling and bicycles. So to be part of the organization, you have to own a bicycle if you don't know how to ride it. And then it's also like an evangelist one, so it's also religious, and they have this leader, but then the leader dies, and like there's other generations and stuff, and we kind of follow snippets of that. And it was just so weird. I think I liked it, but it was very weird. Yeah, I don't know what to say about it, because I'm not sure I completely got what it was trying to say. It also has a little bit of snippets of Serbian history here and there, but that was not the main point, I don't think. So it was just a lot of things that were a little bit over my head, and I think it was well done. I think there were some moments in which there were paragraphs that were very reflective and insightful about things, and I was like, yeah, that's really well written. But then it continued talking about this society, and I was completely lost. And yeah, it was a wild ride of a book. But yeah, it was interesting. I think it was very, very interesting. It was definitely something different. Then I also read Catherine the Great and the Small by Olja Knezevic, and this book was from Montenegro, and it was following a woman, Catherine, and she was her parents died, and she grew up with this other girl. They became best friends, like sister from another mother kind of thing, and we follow them throughout their lives, and in their 20s they get really messy, so it's kind of messy 20-year-old some things that do things that they shouldn't do, like drink and drugs and stuff, with the background of the times in Montenegro and Yugoslavia being torn apart, all that kind of stuff, and the dictatorship and the time after the dictatorship of Tito, all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I've read quite a few books about Yugoslavia in the last couple of months because I'm doing the Read Around the World project, and that's the geographical area I'm focusing on at the moment. And I have to say this was not the best one of all of them. There was nothing particularly wrong with it, but I have read enough 20-year-old something messed up books to be drawn to those kind of stories. And even though the history of Montenegro and all of that was good, the personal stuff about these girls I just didn't care that much about. So yeah, it was okay. Then the next book I read was First They Erased Our Name by Habiburahman, and this is the subtitle is A Rohingya Speaks. It's a non-fiction book about Habib telling his story being a Rohingya in Myanmar, and there is another author for this book, Sophie Ansel, so I think it was kind of ghostwritten by her. But the story was crazy. The things that they do to the Rohingyas are crazy. It's not good. It's not good at all. And it was very hard to read. First of all, he has all these limitations on his life. He's not welcome in most of schools. People just kind of feel that they can kick him in the ground even when he's a kid, and he kind of deserves it just because he's Rohingya. His parents are called to go to concentration camps in a regular basis because apparently, like, if the government decides that they want to build a railway, instead of hiring people, they just take Rohingyas and put them there and with no safety measures or anything, and they tell them, like, build it for free, kind of like that kind of thing. And at some point it gets so bad that he has to flee the country, and obviously he cannot go back, but he's also not accepted in other countries around, and it's just heartbreaking. It's really, really bad, and I was really sorry for him. It's horrible. It's really horrible. There's nothing else I can say about it. It's just horrible. Not the book, the story, the things that they do to them. Then I read Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, and this book is about 5 women in Uruguay that they live in Montevideo, and they feel very repressed there because they are lesbians. So they go for a holiday in the coast, and they kind of fall in love with the place and the freedom that they feel. So they decide to buy this little hut in the coast to be like the refuge. And at some point there is also the dictatorship going in Uruguay, so there's soldiers everywhere and they're not allowed to be lesbian, so they always have to kind of explain why the 5 women traveling alone are there and stuff like that. I found that the topics that it was touching upon and all that, the repression about the LGBTQIA plus community in Uruguay in this time, I don't know how it is now, and the dictatorship and all of that, it was very insightful in that sense. But I also found that the story had a very weird pace. I didn't like the pace of the story. I think it was it was mostly too slow, and it was focusing on some details that I didn't really care about. Like, there was pages and pages about how they were going to name this hut that they bought, or about the complications of them getting the hut, but then there was like things that were not explained enough, and I just felt like the yeah, the way that the story was written was not very compelling. The story itself was really interesting, but the way that it was told, it was not compelling at all for me. So it was a little bit of a disappointment in that sense. And then the last book that I read this month is Les Oniriques by Roland Rugero. And this one was also for the Read Around the World project. I don't remember the country. It was, I think, maybe Burundi. It's very short. It's less than 100 pages. And it was like the writing was very poetic, and it was very beautiful, I think, because it was, I read it in French, so my French is not that good, but still I think I could appreciate the beauty of the language. But the story was about this story of love between a professor and one of his students, and I just didn't vibe with the story. So the writing is very good, but the story was not. So yeah, it's the opposite of Cantoras, I guess. But yeah, I read it. It was not bad. It was just not my cup of tea. So yeah, those are all the books that I read this month. Let me know what you thought about any of them, if you have any thoughts. And yeah, let me know if you want to read any of them, or you have read any of them, or what was your favorite read of December. And until next video, bye!